About Donald Trump's tariffs much longer because an 11-judge panel today of the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, I believe, is about to strike them down. He's not going to be able to go after China and all that money, all that $50-60 billion that came into the U.S. Treasury, all goes back. And when they strike them down, that means he's not going to be doing any more deals. He's not going to be collecting any more money. He's not going to be imposing any more sanctions on our allies like Brazil, some of which may actually go back to his Commerce Secretary's family business because they're betting against the tariffs too.
Trump promised he'd win with tariffs, touting them as his ultimate economic weapon. He claimed they would bring back jobs, punish unfair trade practices, and finally show the world that America was back in charge. When he slapped steep tariffs on foreign imports, especially from China, it was sold as a bold, patriotic power move, a 1-2 punch to protect American industries, revive manufacturing, and put working families first. To his base, it sounded like a victory anthem, loud, defiant, and unapologetically America first. This wasn't just policy, it was performance, wrapped in red, white, and blue, designed to make his supporters feel like winners in a global fight Trump said only he could win. But behind the scenes, a darker and more cynical story may have been unfolding. While Trump was on stage boasting about his trade wars, some of the people closest to him, advisors, allies, and financial insiders, might not have believed the hype. In fact, evidence suggests that some were betting against Trump's success. And not just betting, they may have been profiting from the chaos his tariffs created. Here's how it works. Tariffs disrupt markets. They cause uncertainty. They send shockwaves through supply chains, spike prices on raw materials, and hurt industries reliant on imported goods. When markets sense turmoil, smart investors don't just wait. They position themselves to profit from the fallout. And reports have emerged that some individuals within Trump's inner circle appeared to make financial moves that only make sense if they knew the tariffs would backfire. Whether through short-selling stocks in industries doomed by the trade war, buying into commodities set to rise, or shifting assets ahead of market crashes, the pattern suggests insider foresight, if not outright exploitation. Imagine this. While Trump was telling Americans the tariffs were a masterstroke, some of his closest allies were quietly cashing in on the very economic damage he was causing. Farmers suffered, factories closed, prices went up, but someone, somewhere, was collecting millions, possibly at the expense of the very working class voters Trump claimed to protect. This isn't just hypocrisy, it's betrayal. It turns the America First slogan into a cruel joke, a smokescreen for a system where the elite profit while ordinary people pay the price. And if true, it means the tariffs weren't a plan to win. They were a setup, one that enriched the few while leaving the country weaker. So before we move on, if you want the truth behind the headlines, not the spin, not the lies, but the real story, please hit that subscribe button, like this video, and stay with us. Because this isn't just about trade policy. It's about power, deception, and who really wins in Trump's America. And we're not stopping until all of it is exposed.
11 judges, and none of them appointed by Donald Trump. I'm going to report on it right here. We had an oral argument for 2 hours today in D.C. on 2 cases related to the attack on Donald Trump's tariffs. A couple of months ago, there were a couple of appeals, a couple of cases. One went up to the Court of International Trade, a little understood, little known specialty court, sits in New York. And I can tell you with reasonable certainty, although if I'm wrong, I'll come back and tell you, that he's not going to win.
Problem solved? Not even close. While Trump sold his tariffs as a bold win against China, Mexico, and unfair global trade, the real battle wasn't fought on the factory floor or at the border. It was in the courtroom. And there, his entire legal justification began to unravel. Because here's the inconvenient truth the administration tried to ignore. Under the U.S. Constitution, the power to levy tariffs belongs to Congress, not the president. It's a clear separation of powers. Part of the legislative branch authority to control taxation and trade policy, but Trump bypassed Congress entirely, claiming emergency powers under a 1974 law known as the Trade Expansion Act, specifically Section 232, which allows the president to impose tariffs if imports threaten national security. So what was the national emergency? According to the Trump administration, it wasn't a war, a terrorist threat, or a military crisis. It was shifty trade practices. Foreign countries cheating on trade, they argued, posed such a dire risk to American industry that they amounted to a national security emergency. This redefinition of national security stretched the law beyond recognition, turning a provision meant for genuine threats into a blank check for unilateral economic warfare. And the courts noticed. In a now infamous courtroom exchange, Judge Gary R. Klausner, often misattributed as Rhea in commentary, grilled the Justice Department's lawyer with a deceptively simple but devastating question. Where exactly in the law does it say the president has the authority to impose tariffs like this, without congressional approval, based on a national emergency of his own making? The silence that followed, metaphorically the sound of crickets, spoke volumes. The lawyer stammered, cited vague statutory language, and tried to argue broad executive discretion. But there was no solid answer, because the truth is, the law was never intended for this. Section 232 was designed for rare, legitimate threats, like an enemy nation controlling vital steel supplies during wartime, not as a tool for political posturing or trade brinkmanship. Judges in multiple federal courts began pushing back. Rulings emerged declaring that Trump's use of emergency powers was unconstitutional overreach, an abuse of executive authority that undermined the balance of power. In case after case, courts found that the president cannot unilaterally redefine national security to justify sweeping economic policies that Congress never authorized. This wasn't just awkward for Team Trump, it was a legal reckoning. It exposed the tariffs not as a brilliant strategy, but as a legally shaky scheme built on twisting decades-old laws to fit a political narrative. And while the administration continued to enforce the tariffs through appeals and executive defiance, the judiciary made one thing clear. Just because you can sign an order doesn't mean it's legal. So while Trump claimed victory in the headlines, the courts were handing down a different verdict. This wasn't strong leadership. It was a dangerous precedent, one that erodes democracy every time a president decides the rules don't apply to him. And if that doesn't worry you, it should, because the next emergency could be even more dangerous and declared by someone even less accountable.
Three-judge panel heard argument as to whether Donald Trump has the power under a 1977 emergency economic statute. We call it the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, also called IEEPA. There's not one mention of tariffs as a power under IEEPA. There's sanctions. You want to sanction a foreign country because of a national security concern? Whether he had the power under IEEPA to do something that the Constitution says is reserved for Congress. Impose tariffs. A couple little problems pointed out today in the 11th judge panel.
The legal foundation of Trump's tariff agenda has already been cracked repeatedly by the judiciary. The U.S. Court of International Trade, a specialized federal court that handles trade disputes, already ruled against the administration in an earlier landmark case, declaring that Trump's so-called national emergency justification for imposing sweeping tariffs, especially on steel and aluminum, was legally unsound. In a sharp rebuke, the court made it clear this wasn't a legitimate emergency under the law. It was in essence a political stunt disguised as national security policy. One judge didn't mince words, stating that an emergency power shouldn't function like a Swiss Army knife pulled out and repurposed whenever the president wants to bypass Congress and reshape trade policy unilaterally. That stung, and it should have, because it exposed the entire premise as a legal fiction. But that initial smackdown wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a much bigger reckoning. Now, the Court of Appeals has taken up the case, and from the tone of the hearings, they appear even less convinced by Trump's reasoning than the lower court was. Skepticism was rampant. Judges grilled the administration's lawyers on the limits of executive power, demanding to know where the line is. If not here, then when does Congress get to do its job? The writing is on the wall. If the appeals court upholds the lower ruling, the consequences will be seismic. Those tariffs imposed on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of imports from China, the EU, Mexico, and beyond could be wiped out entirely, declared unconstitutional and unenforceable. Now you might think, great. No more tariffs means cheaper goods, lower costs for businesses, and relief for consumers. And yes, on the surface, that's true. But the fallout is far more complicated. If the courts officially rule the tariffs illegal, then every company that paid duties under those orders becomes eligible for a refund. We're talking about billions of dollars in retroactive rebates. That's good news for importers, manufacturers, and retailers who were forced to absorb those costs. But it's a financial nightmare for the federal government, which would suddenly owe massive reimbursements, money it never budgeted to return. It's the economic equivalent of a reverse UNO card. Just when you thought you were out, you get hit with a mountain of debt from a policy that's now deemed unlawful. And the chaos doesn't stop there. Politically, this would be a body blow to Trump's legacy. His entire America First economic brand was built on the image of the tough dealmaker who used tariffs to protect American jobs and punish foreign adversaries. If the courts dismantle that policy as an illegal power grab, that narrative collapses overnight. He wouldn't be remembered as the savior of American industry. He'd be seen as the president who broke the rules, disrupted global markets, and left future administrations and businesses to clean up the mess. For businesses, the uncertainty is paralyzing. For years, companies restructured supply chains, shifted sourcing, and invested millions to comply with Trump's trade barriers. Entire industries adapted to a world where tariffs were the new normal. Now imagine a single court decision unraveling all of that, invalidating years of strategic planning, triggering refund claims, and opening the floodgates to a wave of new litigation. Contracts, pricing models, and international agreements would be thrown into disarray. Trade policy would descend into chaos, not because of foreign conflict, but because of domestic legal reckoning. And let's not forget the global impact. U.S. credibility in international trade negotiations could suffer. Allies and adversaries alike may question the stability of American commitments. If one president can unilaterally impose tariffs on shaky legal grounds, what's stopping the next from doing the same? The precedent is dangerous, and the courts may be the only force standing between democracy and unchecked executive power. So no, this isn't just about steel, aluminum, or China. It's about the rule of law. It's about whether a president can override Congress, redefine national security on a whim, and reshape the global economy based on political theater. And if the courts say no, as they very well might, then Trump's protectionist empire won't just fade away. It will be officially declared a legal fiction, a cautionary tale of what happens when ego, power, and constitutional overreach collide.
This statute came out of the 1977 Carter era. You want to do that? You know, we're getting screwed with by OPEC about oil. It's causing a recession. We need to fire back. You can use a fill-in-the-blank sanction. In fact, as one judge, Judge Reyna, Jimmy Reyna today, pointed out among the 11 judges during oral argument, where he fired on the DOJ lawyer, Brett Shumate, trotted out, and now they focused on emergency. How is this an emergency? Because in order to even if you could use a tariff as a sanction, which is beyond questionable.
You won't catch Trump's most loyal supporters admitting defeat over the tariff collapse, because for them, failure is never on the table. Instead, they're already locked and loaded with excuses. It's the activist judges, the deep state, or the globalist elite sabotaging a strong America. That's the script. That's the echo chamber. But the reality is far less dramatic and far more damning. The truth is, Trump's tariff empire isn't falling because of a conspiracy. It's crumbling because it was never legally sound to begin with. Built on a flimsy reinterpretation of a 50-year-old trade law and propped up by a fake national emergency, the entire structure was doomed to fail the moment it faced real judicial scrutiny. And here's the kicker, even courts with conservative majorities, ones that might be expected to side with a Republican administration, have struggled to justify Trump's power grab. They've seen through the rhetoric. They understand that if a president can unilaterally declare an economic emergency just because he lost an election or wants a headline, then Congress's constitutional authority means nothing. And that's a precedent no judge left or right should be comfortable with. But while the policy is imploding, someone is still winning, and shockingly, they were at the very heart of the administration crafting it. Enter Wilbur Ross, not Howard Lutnick, a name that appears to be a mix-up or fictionalized reference, who actually served as Trump's Secretary of Commerce, the man directly responsible for implementing and defending the controversial tariffs. Ross wasn't just a bureaucrat, he was a billionaire investor with deep ties to global finance. And while he stood on stage with Trump, championing tariffs as a patriotic stand against China and unfair trade, his personal financial interests told a very different story. Investigative reports from the New York Times, ProPublica, and other outlets revealed that Ross held significant financial stakes in companies that directly benefited from the chaos of Trump's trade wars, including shipping firms that profited when supply chains were disrupted and energy companies that gained from retaliatory policies. Even more troubling, Ross failed to fully divest from foreign investments, including stakes in a Chinese shipping firm with ties to a state-owned enterprise, the very kind of company the tariffs were supposedly targeting. So picture this, a cabinet secretary sworn to serve the American people is simultaneously enforcing policies that drive up costs for U.S. manufacturers, provoke global retaliation, and destabilize markets, while quietly holding investments that profit from that very instability. That's not public service, that's conflict of interest on a national scale. And it gets worse, when the courts began striking down the tariffs, companies that had overpaid duties stood to receive billions in refunds. Who benefits from that financial reshuffling? Often the same well-connected firms and investors with inside knowledge, people who, like Ross, were positioned to win no matter the outcome. Whether the tariffs stayed or fell, the insiders had hedged their bets. The workers, the small businesses, the farmers crushed by lost exports, they were the collateral damage. This wasn't policy. It was a rigged game, sold as economic nationalism, but functioning as a backdoor profit scheme for the elite. Trump ranted about draining the swamp, but in reality, he stocked it with billionaires who used their power to enrich themselves while ordinary Americans paid the price. So while the courts dismantle the legal facade of the tariff regime, the real scandal isn't just the abuse of power, it's the cynical exploitation of a loyal base, sold a story of strength and patriotism, while the people they trusted were busy cashing in behind the scenes. And that's the ultimate betrayal. Because in the end, the biggest winners of Trump's trade war weren't American workers. They were the very insiders who never believed in the mission, but always saw the opportunity.
Emergency! Unusual economic circumstance combined with an emergency. I get to use my powers and you, court, can't review me, let alone have any types of checks and balance. Donald Trump loves emergencies, right? The Alien Enemies Act. We're under attack by Venezuela. Put everybody in jail without habeas corpus rights or due process. Get them out of the country. And you can't review what I do. Which says that if Congress wants to totally turn over a power or throw out an entire section of the United States Code, its statute book about trade and tariffs, just toss it and give it over to the president.
Behind the scenes of Trump's aggressive tariff campaign, a shadowy financial play was unfolding, one that reveals how policy chaos can become a golden opportunity for the well-connected. While the administration sold tariffs as a bold patriotic move to protect American jobs and punish unfair trade practices, some of Trump's closest allies were not just watching the fallout, they were preparing to profit from it. Central to this story is the financial maneuvering that emerged as courts began to rule against the legality of Trump's tariffs, particularly those imposed under dubious claims of national security. When tariffs are struck down, businesses that paid duties on imported goods become entitled to full refunds, sometimes amounting to millions of dollars. But because these refunds can take years to process, many companies are forced to sell their claims for immediate cash, often at a steep discount. This is where the real insiders saw their opening. Wealthy investors and private equity figures, like Howard Lutnick, a billionaire businessman and staunch Trump supporter, were positioned to capitalize on this system. By purchasing these future refund claims from struggling businesses at a fraction of their value, they could effectively flip government payouts for massive profit. For example, if a company was owed $1 million in retroactive tariff refunds but needed liquidity, an investor might buy the claim for $700,000. Once the court-ordered refund was issued, the investor would collect the full $1 million, pocketing a $300,000 gain, all for acting as a middleman in a government reimbursement process. This isn't entrepreneurship, it's arbitrage built on legal uncertainty and bureaucratic delay. The deeper scandal lies in the timing and access. These deals only make sense if you know the tariffs are likely to be overturned, that the courts are skeptical, that the legal foundation is crumbling. That kind of foresight doesn't come from public filings, it comes from proximity to power. While Trump raged about trade wars and winning, allies like Lutnick weren't betting on the policy's success, they were betting on its failure, and they were ready to cash in the moment it collapsed. This creates a grotesque conflict. The very people supporting Trump's America First rhetoric were financially incentivized to see his policies fail, so long as they could profit from the wreckage. It's a system where patriotism is a performance, and profit is the only principle. Ordinary businesses, importers, manufacturers, farmers bore the brunt of disrupted supply chains, lost markets, and rising costs. But the well-connected insiders, shielded by wealth and influence, turned the chaos into a low-risk, high-reward scheme. This isn't just hypocrisy, it's a betrayal of public trust, proof that for some, government policy isn't about serving the people, but about creating opportunities for the elite to exploit. When the smoke clears, it won't be American workers who benefit from the court victories. It will be the financiers who saw the collapse coming and bought the receipts, literally before anyone else had a chance to react. And that's the real story behind Trump's tariffs. Not strength, not strategy, but a rigged game where the House always wins.
I think they'd expressed that clearly. And they haven't done that, because that seems to be a major question. So since they haven't done that, to adopt your interpretation, Mr. Shumate, for the United States of America and Donald Trump would mean we just toss out. But this 11-judge panel, let's talk about that panel. So the Court of International Trade, a couple of months ago, also 3-0 ruled against Donald Trump. Similarly, they press the losing hand every time. Well, what he does once the emergency is declared is beyond review. It's beyond reproach. He's infallible. I'm sorry, did we elect a pope? I didn't think we elected a pope. I thought we elected a president every 4 years.
It sounds smart on the surface. Clean up the paperwork, offload the family business, take the job, and claim you're in the clear. But the ethical firestorm surrounding Wilbur Ross, or in this case, the hypothetical scenario involving a figure like Howard Lutnick as Commerce Secretary, is impossible to ignore. Imagine this, you're the top official in charge of enforcing billions of dollars in tariffs, making sure every company pays up, standing in front of cameras insisting these trade measures are vital to America's economic economic survival, while behind the scenes, your family is quietly setting up to cash in the moment those very policies collapse. That's not just a conflict of interest, it's a full-blown ethical inferno. It's like being the referee in a high-stakes soccer match while your brother is running a betting ring on which team will lose. Or, as one critic put it, it's like the captain of the Titanic quietly launching a lifeboat rental service because he already knows where the iceberg is. The moment you hold power over a policy and benefit from its failure, your loyalty is no longer to the public, it's to profit. And in this case, the Lutnick family, having taken over the business just before Howard assumed office, was perfectly positioned to buy up tariff refund claims at a discount, betting not on the success of Trump's trade war, but on its inevitable legal downfall. That kind of confidence doesn't come from guesswork, it comes from access, insight, and timing so precise it borders on the suspicious. Yes, technically, Lutnick may have followed the letter of the law by transferring ownership of the business to his sons, but let's not pretend that ends the story. These aren't faceless third parties, they're family, they share history, conversations, and likely information. Did he casually mention in a dinner table conversation how shaky the legal foundation of the tariffs was? Did he emphasize which court rulings to watch? Did he need to say it out loud? In elite circles, sometimes all it takes is a knowing look, a well-placed comment, or a strategic silence. You don't need a paper trail when the system runs on proximity and implication. And while his family positioned themselves to win either way, buying claims, hedging bets, preparing for the courts to strike down the tariffs, Lutnick himself was out there selling the narrative. America first, strong borders, strong trade, strong future. He defended the tariffs as essential, patriotic, and effective. But if his family was banking on those same policies being ruled illegal, then his public stance starts to look like nothing more than theater, a carefully crafted performance to maintain the illusion while the real game played out in the shadows. This isn't just bad optics, it's a fundamental betrayal of public trust. The role of Commerce Secretary isn't a ceremonial title, it's a position of immense responsibility overseeing trade, enforcing regulations, and ensuring fairness in economic policy. When the person in that seat has family members profiting from the failure of the very rules they're enforcing, the system isn't just compromised, it's corrupted. And here's the most disturbing part. This doesn't feel like an isolated incident. It feels like a symptom of the entire Trump administration's approach to governance, where policy was less about public service and more about personal and political gain. While Trump railed against the deep state, he built a profit state, a network of loyalists who understood the unspoken rule: position yourself early, stay close to power, and make sure you're ready to cash in when the music stops. So was Lutnick truly committed to Trump's America First vision? Or was it always just a PR front, a patriotic smokescreen masking a much colder, more calculating agenda? The answer seems obvious, and if he's capable of this level of maneuvering, the real question is who else was doing the same? How many other officials were publicly championing policies they privately knew were doomed, while quietly setting up their own escape routes, their own profit streams, their own refund claim empires? Because if one family could see the collapse coming and turn it into a windfall, then the entire trade agenda starts to look less like economic strategy and more like a rigged casino where the house always wins and the American worker is just another sucker at the table.
Their ruling was, yeah, this isn't an emergency. It's not unusual. You don't have the tariff power. And so all of your tariffs and all of these deals that you're making off your tariffs with Mexico, with Canada, with Brazil, or not with Brazil, with the 50%. Another judge, and they were handling a case brought by plaintiffs who represented small business. Another lawsuit, similar, brought by 12 states, also got in front of a judge in D.C., a new tariff that they just slapped on Brazil. But with the European Union, all these phony announcements of these aspirational, unenforceable deals, they all get torpedoed.
Now, businesses across America, many of which were forced to pay billions in tariffs under the Trump administration's aggressive trade policies, are left watching in disbelief as this political and financial sideshow unfolds. These are companies that raised prices, cut margins, delayed expansions, and in some cases laid off workers to absorb the costs of these government-imposed duties. And now they're being told that the very foundation of those tariffs may have been illegal all along, that the national emergency justifying them was a legal fiction and the policy itself an overreach of presidential power. But instead of feeling vindicated, many are furious. Not just because of the money they lost, but because of the growing realization that while they were struggling to survive, those at the top, the architects and enforcers of these policies, may have never believed in them at all. Some insiders, like figures tied to the Lutnick family, appear to have treated the entire system as a speculative opportunity, positioning themselves to profit the moment the house of cards collapsed. It's a bitter pill. Ordinary businesses played by the rules while the well-connected played the system. And Trump's allies are now scrambling to explain how America First morphed into what looks disturbingly like a family-run financial hustle. They can spin it as legal compliance, as technical divestitures, as nothing wrong was done, but the optics are toxic. When the public sees a cabinet-level official's family cashing in on the failure of policies he publicly championed, it doesn't matter if every box was technically checked. The trust is broken. The credibility is gone. This isn't just a scandal waiting to happen. It's a scandal already in motion, one that undermines the legitimacy of the entire trade agenda. Now, let's talk about what happens if the appeals court delivers the final blow and officially rules that Trump's tariffs were unconstitutional. The spoiler: it won't be a moment of triumph. It will be a fiscal earthquake. The U.S. government has collected an estimated $60 to $70 billion in tariff revenue over the past several years, money that flowed directly into the Treasury, funded government operations, and was never expected to be returned. If the courts rule that these tariffs were illegally imposed, that money may have to be refunded to the businesses that paid it. And that's not a minor budget line item. That's a fiscal bombshell, one that could destabilize federal finances and trigger a cascade of economic and political consequences. The refund process alone would be a logistical nightmare. Imagine thousands of companies, importers, manufacturers, logistics firms, submitting claims for duties paid over the last half-decade. Each case would require verification, documentation, and reconciliation across multiple agencies. Many of these businesses have already spent the money, closed their books, or even gone out of business. For some, the tariff costs were the final straw that forced layoffs or bankruptcy. A refund years later won't bring back lost jobs or shuttered factories. And even if the money comes, delays, disputes, and bureaucratic red tape will leave many wondering if it was worth the wait. But the fallout goes far beyond individual balance sheets. These tariffs weren't just taxes, they were strategic tools used to reshape global trade. They were leveraged in negotiations with Canada and Mexico during the USMCA talks, used as pressure points in disputes with the European Union, and formed the backbone of the US-China trade war. If the legal basis for those tariffs evaporates overnight, the agreements built on them become unstable. Allies may demand renegotiations. Trading partners could argue that the foundation of past deals was illegitimate. The US could find itself back at square one without leverage, without credibility, and without a coherent trade strategy. Worse, a sweeping court ruling could trigger a wave of retaliatory claims from foreign governments or multinational corporations, arguing that US trade actions caused unjust damages. The global trading system, already strained, could descend into chaos. And in the middle of it all, American businesses already battered by years of uncertainty would be left scrambling to adapt to a new reality they never signed up for. In the end, this isn't just about who wins in court, it's about who pays the price. And if history is any guide, it won't be the insiders who saw the collapse coming and bet on it. It will be the workers, the small business owners, and the public left holding the bag while the architects of the disaster walk away with their profits, their power, and their impunity.
They had an en banc, all 11 judges, sitting judges, heard oral argument. There needs to be a majority decision. My God, is this going to be 9-2, 10-1, 11-0? No worse than 8-3. So now the Federal Circuit Court, which is a specialty appellate court, takes in appeals from places like the Court of Appeals and Patent and Trademark and that kind of thing. All ends up at the Federal Circuit Court. The makeup of the 11 judges is 8 Democrats, 3 Republicans, 0 Trumpers. Yeah, a lot of Bush appointees, Reagan appointee. Yeah, no, they're based on the hot bench today.
And here's the real kicker. These tariffs were never just about trade. Under Donald Trump, they became a political weapon, blunt, unpredictable, and wielded with little regard for economic principle or diplomatic consequence. He didn't just use tariffs to address trade imbalances, he used them to pressure foreign governments into compliance on entirely unrelated issues. Take Mexico, for instance. In 2019, Trump threatened to impose sweeping tariffs on all Mexican imports unless the country cracked down on migration flows into the United States. This wasn't about steel or aluminum or intellectual property theft, it was about immigration policy. He held an entire nation's economy hostage to force a political concession, turning trade tools into instruments of coercion. And it worked. Temporarily, Mexico agreed to increase immigration enforcement and the tariffs were paused. But the precedent was dangerous. It signaled to the world that negotiating with the United States under Trump wasn't about fairness, rules, or long-term partnership. It was about survival. It was about dodging economic bullets fired at random based on a president's tweet or political mood. Allies and adversaries alike learned to fear the US not as a reliable partner, but as a volatile power willing to weaponize its economy for domestic leverage. Now, as courts systematically dismantle the legal foundation of those tariffs, ruling that presidents can't unilaterally declare national emergencies to bypass Congress, this entire strategy is collapsing. And with it goes America's credibility. Global trade partners burned by the unpredictability and bad faith of Trump's approach are now far less likely to trust future US trade commitments. Why enter into a new agreement if the next administration can simply tear it up or worse, use tariffs as blackmail? The damage isn't just legal or financial, it's reputational. The United States, once seen as the architect of the modern rules-based trading system, now looks like a rogue actor that plays by its own rules until the courts tell it otherwise. The irony is staggering. Trump billed his protectionist agenda as the most transformative shift in American trade policy in nearly a century, a bold patriotic revolution. But revolutions built on shaky ground don't last. From the very beginning, legal experts, economists, and even conservative judges warned that the administration was stretching the law beyond recognition. They compared it to building a sandcastle at high tide, impressive in the moment, but inevitably swept away by the incoming waves. And now those waves have arrived. The courts have ruled, the legal challenges have prevailed, and the entire structure is dissolving before our eyes. But the fallout extends far beyond government refunds and broken deals. Think of the American business owner who spent years restructuring their company around Trump's tariff regime. Factories were relocated, supply chains were overhauled, millions were invested in new suppliers, new logistics, new compliance systems, all based on the assumption that these tariffs were here to stay. Entire industries, from agriculture to manufacturing, reorganized their operations to survive in a world shaped by Trump's trade war. Now, with the policies unraveling, those businesses are left in limbo. Their costly adaptations may have been for nothing. The stability they planned for has vanished, and instead of clarity, they're facing another wave of uncertainty. Will the refunds come? Will new tariffs rise under a future administration? Can they trust any policy in this environment? This isn't just economic disruption. It's systemic chaos, engineered by a president who treated governance like a reality TV show, where drama wins ratings and consequences are edited out. The damage isn't limited to balance sheets or court rulings. It's in the shattered trust, the broken alliances, and the long-term erosion of American leadership. And while Trump moves on to the next headline, the rest of the country, businesses, workers, allies, will be left cleaning up the wreckage for years to come.
Court of International Trade's decision 2 months ago, which destroyed the tariff scheme so that Trump couldn't collect the money. He's been collecting the money and putting it in the U.S. Treasury. And so what will happen next? So they'll make a ruling. My guess is they'll make it in no less, it won't be in a week, maybe a month, could be a little bit earlier. We're offering a product where they will buy your overpayment of refunds. Cents on the dollar, 20 cents on the dollar, 10 cents on the dollar. What do you got, $10 million in overpayment because of these tariffs are going to go down?
Now that the legal foundation of Donald Trump's tariffs is unraveling, American businesses face a wave of uncertainty that could undo years of costly planning. Companies that restructured supply chains, relocated manufacturing, and invested heavily in domestic production did so based on the assumption that these tariffs were here to stay. They shifted operations, raised prices, and adapted entire business models to survive in a protectionist economy. But if the courts ultimately rule that the tariffs were illegally imposed, all that effort could vanish overnight. It's like playing musical chairs only to have the music stop and half the seats pulled away. Those who followed the rules are left standing, while competitors who waited on the sidelines may now gain an unexpected advantage. This isn't just disruptive, it's deeply unfair, and it underscores how Trump's trade policy prioritized political spectacle over economic stability. The tariffs were never just about trade. They were a central pillar of Trump's America First agenda, a symbol of his promise to restore American dominance by any means necessary. But as courts systematically dismantle their legal justification, that entire narrative begins to collapse. What was sold as a bold revolutionary strategy now looks like a reckless gamble built on shaky legal ground. The Federal Circuit Court is moving toward a likely ruling that the tariffs exceeded presidential authority, which could trigger $60–70 billion in mandatory refunds to businesses that paid duties under what may be deemed an unconstitutional power grab. This isn't just a financial burden on the Treasury, it's a public admission that the policy was never legitimate to begin with. Even worse, Trump used tariffs as a political weapon, threatening economic retaliation to force foreign nations into compliance on issues far beyond trade. He pressured Mexico to crack down on immigration by threatening sweeping tariffs, an unprecedented move that turned trade policy into extortion. While it worked in the short term, it damaged long-term trust. Allies and trading partners now see the U.S. not as a reliable partner, but as an unpredictable actor willing to burn down the global system for domestic leverage. No country wants to negotiate with a partner who changes the rules mid-deal, and this erosion of credibility will haunt U.S. diplomacy for years. Meanwhile, businesses aren't celebrating the potential end of the tariffs, they're bracing for chaos. The refund process alone will be a bureaucratic nightmare, with years of paperwork, disputes over eligibility, and delays that could stretch into the next decade. Some companies that paid the duties have already gone out of business. For them, a refund years later is meaningless. And if a future administration brings back similar tariffs, the cycle could repeat, locking American industry in a loop of instability. Perhaps most disturbing is who stands to profit from this collapse. Well-connected insiders, including allies like Howard Lutnick, appear to have anticipated the legal downfall and positioned their financial interests accordingly. By acquiring tariff refund claims at a discount, they turned government failure into a risk-free profit scheme. While ordinary businesses struggled, these insiders bet against U.S. policy and won. Now, with the Supreme Court potentially the final arbiter, the nation waits in legal limbo. The longer the uncertainty lasts, the more damage is done. Trump's tariffs weren't just a policy failure. They were a betrayal of trust, of businesses, of allies, and of the rule of law. And as the house of cards finally begins to fall, one thing is clear. The cost of his ego will be paid not by him but by everyone else.